Lines from the autopsy protocols sounded in his own voice, though he had never read them out loud. The feces were formed, a trace of talcum on the lower right leg, fracture of the medial orbit wall owing to insertion of mirror shard. Graham tried to think about the beach at Sugarloaf Key. He tried to hear the waves. He pictured his workbench in his mind and thought about the escapement for the water clock he and Willie were building. He sang Whiskey River under his breath and tried to run Black Mountain Rag through his head from one end to the other. Molly's music. Doc Watson's guitar part was all right, but he always lost it in the fiddle break. Molly had tried to teach him clog dancing in the backyard, and she was bouncing. And he finally dozed. He woke in an hour, rigid and sweating, seeing the other pillow silhouetted against the bathroom light, and it was Mrs. Leeds lying beside him, bitten and torn, mirrored eyes and blood, like the legs of spectacles over her temples and ears. He could not turn his head to face her. Brain screaming like a smoke alarm, he put his hand over there and touched dry cloth. Having acted, he felt some immediate relief. He rose, his heart pounding, and put on a dry t-shirt. He threw the wet one into the bathtub. He could not move to the dry side of the bed. Instead, he put a towel on the side where he had sweated and laid down on it, propped against the headboard with a stiff drink in his hand. He swallowed a third of it. He reached for something to think about. Anything. The pharmacy where he bought the 𝘈𝘓 then. Perhaps because it was his only experience all day that was not related to death. He could remember old drugstores with soda fountains. As a boy, he thought old drugstores had a slightly furtive air. When you went in, you always thought about buying rubbers, whether you needed any or not. There were things on the shelves you shouldn't look at too long. In the pharmacy where he bought the 𝘈𝘓, the contraceptives with their illustrated wrappings were in a lucid case on the wall behind the cash register, framed like art. He preferred the drugstore and sundry of his childhood. Graham was nearly 40 and just beginning to feel the tug of the way the world was then. It was a sea anchor streamed behind him in heavy weather. He thought about Smoot. Old Smoot had been the soda jerk and manager for the pharmacist who owned the local drugstore when Graham was a child. Smoot, who drank on the job, forgot to unroll the awning, and the sneakers melted in the window. Smoot forgot to unplug the coffee pot, and the fire department was summoned. Smoot sold ice cream cones to children on credit. His principal outrage was ordering 50 𝘠𝘳𝘕 dolls from a detail man while the store owner was on vacation. On his return, the owner fired Smoot for a week. Then they held a 𝘠𝘳𝘕 doll sale. 50 of the 𝘠𝘳𝘕 dolls were arranged in a semicircle in the front window so that they all stared at whoever was looking in. They had wide eyes of cornflower blue. It was a striking display, and Graham had looked at it for some time. He knew they were only 𝘠𝘳𝘕 dolls, but he could feel the focus of their attention. So many of them looking. A number of people stopped to look at them. Plaster dolls, all with the same silly spit curl, yet their concentrated gaze had made his face tingle. Graham began to relax a little on the bed, Cupid doll staring. He started to take a drink, gasped, and choked into his chest. He fumbled for the bedside lamp and fetched his box from the dresser drawer. He took out the autopsy protocols of the 3 Leeds children and his measured field sketches of the master bedroom and spread them on the bed. Here were the 3 blood stains slanting up the corner, and here were the matching stains on the carpet. Here were the dimensions of the 3 children. Brother, sister, big brother. Match, match, match. They had been in a row, seated along the wall facing the bed. An audience, a dead audience. And Leeds, tied around the chest to the headboard, composed to look as though he were sitting up in bed. Getting the ligature mark, staining the wall above the headboard. What were they watching? Nothing. They were all dead. But their eyes were open. They were watching a performance starring the madman and the body of Mrs. Leeds, beside Mr. Leeds in the bed. An audience. The crazy could look around at their faces. Graham wondered if he had held a candle. The flickering light would simulate expression on their faces. No candle was found. Maybe he would think to do that next time. This first small bond to the killer itched and stung like a leech. Graham bit the sheet, thinking, why did you move them again? Why didn't you leave them that way? Graham asked. There's something you don't want me to know about you. Why, there's something you're ashamed of. Or is it something you can't afford for me to know? Did you open their eyes? Mrs. Leeds was lovely, wasn't she? You turned on the light after you cut his throat, so Mrs. Leeds could watch him flap, didn't you? It was maddening to have to wear gloves when you touched her, wasn't it? There was talcum on her leg. There was no talcum in the bathroom. Someone else seemed to speak those 2 facts in a flat voice. You took off your gloves, didn't you? The powder came out of a rubber glove as you pulled it off to touch her. Didn't you, you son of a bitch? You touched her with your bare hands, and then you put the gloves back on, and you wiped her down. But while the gloves were off, did you open their eyes? Jack Crawford answered his phone on the 5th ring. He had answered the telephone in the night many times, and he was not confused. Jack, this is Will. Yes, Jack. Is Prince still in Leighton Prince? Yeah. He doesn't go out much anymore. He's working on the single print index. I think he ought to come to Atlanta. Why? You said yourself the guy down here is good. He is good, but not as good as Price. What do you want to do with him? Where would he look? Mrs. Leeds' fingernails and toenails. They're painted. It's a flat surface. And the corneas of all their eyes. I think he took his gloves off, Jack. Jesus, Price will have to gun it, Crawford said. The funeral's this afternoon.